Welcome back to the Majority Report. I'm Michael Brooks. Joining us now is David Cleon. He is a journalist and editor based in Brooklyn, New York. He's written extensively on Russia and international affairs. David, thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me.
So, David, you wrote a very interesting piece, a op-ed column in the New York Times on November 14th called "Why Don't Sanders Supporters Care About the Russia Investigation?" And I just want to set the conversation a little bit. And you can see this even inside our audience. The conversation gets very polarized. I am definitely a bit more sympathetic to the Russia as a very sort of, in some respects, partially because, look, let's table a couple things. There's a lot of conspiracy theories and sort of alt-center hysteria about Russia. But at the same time, there's been this sort of smaller contingent, but a certain group of people on the left have wanted to sort of entirely ignore the story, even though there's something to it. We don't know the scale of it, but there's something to it. Can you kind of set up the parameters of your view of the Russia investigation and then why people on the actual left should care about it?
Sure. And I think that's a very fair way to introduce the topic. And actually, just before I get into that, I want to say for your audience that, as is virtually always the case with op-eds anywhere, I did not write and actually was not consulted on the title of the piece.
Right.
Why don't Sanders supporters care about the Russia investigation?
Right.
As a Sanders supporter myself, the single most frequent complaint I've gotten about the piece is I'm a Sanders supporter and I do care,
Right.
which I think a lot do. So it was an intentionally provocative headline, and I say that with all due respect to the excellent editors I worked with. But it of course simplifies what I was trying to say, and I probably wouldn't have. I probably would have said the left and not specifically Sanders supporters. But with that said, my view of how we should look at the Russia story, I think that there's an abundance of evidence, even if a lot of it is more smoke than fire, that there was a coordinated effort by the Russian government to interfere in the 2016 election. I think that you can point to several distinct areas where new information is coming out all the time, and I want to speak very carefully because, as you rightly noted, there are conspiracy theorists. I will name some. There is Louise Mensch. There is Eric Garland. Seth Abramson, I think. Some of them are worse than others, but there are definitely people, especially on Twitter, and some of them have gotten platforms on MSNBC and elsewhere, even in the New York Times, who are wildly speculating, faking Russia expertise, spreading misinformation, and I just want to make clear that I disown all of that, and that I think I was actually slow to recognize that that was a real problem, because a year or so ago, at the time of the election, before and after, I was much more concerned with the world historical event that was actually happening than with the fact that it had given rise to some grifters. But in retrospect, I understand.
I'm laughing because I think that so much of how the conversation gets distorted in our and we may agree or disagree on specifics of Russia, but I think that is you identified such a fundamental problem in a lot of the discourse right now, that people are, yes, of course, people like Mensch and Garland are a profound problem and distorting and all the rest, but the notion that when you have this administration in place, and I would say any administration in place, and even just the broader structural realities of Washington dysfunction and corruption, and your primary concern is that some, Twitter troll is going to leverage a global Cold War more so than literally what's happening every day from the higher reaches of power that's right in front of your face, that should be your signal that you have a fundamental misalignment with reality. So I appreciate that.
Absolutely. And I want to say that although I am always hesitant to call myself a Russia expert, I think to call yourself an expert is smug. What is true is that I have been following Russia and the former Soviet Union and its history and its politics since, let's say, 2002 or so, and since college. I'm dating myself. But in a variety of contexts, and I did not discover Russia with the 2016 election,
right.
Which it often feels like a lot of people on both sides of this did. And the notion that Russia would be inclined to interfere in various ways, while it can seem bizarre and unprecedented, there were, and I certainly didn't predict it in advance, there were reasons to think, based on things that they had done in neighboring countries, based on the general state of U.S.-Russia relations. In fact, a rejected pitch that I did in maybe, 2014 or so, for a magazine I won't name, was when it seemed clear that Hillary Clinton was the likely frontrunner and likely next president, but she hadn't formally declared yet, so I was early on this. I had concerns about her relationship with Putin, their antagonistic relationship, and the roots of that, which I knew a lot about, and I thought it might be a problem.
Right.
And they were like, oh, this is too early, too speculative. And I don't really blame them for that as an editorial decision. But in hindsight, it would have been a very prophetic piece, I think.
Absolutely.
Hi, folks. Sam Seder here. We still need your help on our Patreon page. YouTube ads have come back, but not nearly as much as we had before. So if you can help us out, any little bit helps. Head over to our Patreon page right at this URL, and you'll help us keep helping you by making videos